Hi, I'd like to introduce everyone to our video today. We're going to be discussing the Vatican City and what made the Vatican City what it is. So, we all know that the Vatican is a very old church, followed by many Catholics. And what we're going to be diving into today is specifically looking at what created the Vatican City versus what created the Holy See, and then looking at how it connects with international affairs, and basically what is the difference between Catholicism and the Holy See. So that's going to be a big premise of what we look at today. We're also going to be looking at the expansion of the Vatican and the Holy See and looking at Catholicism. So first, what is Catholicism? The faith, practice, and church order of the Roman Catholic Church. Catholicism is centered in Rome, Italy, which is where the Vatican City State is currently at. What is the Vatican City State, or the VCS? It is the center of the Roman Catholic Church and centered in Rome, Italy. It was created through the Lateran Treaty on February 11, 1929. There were multiple adaptations of the treaty afterwards, and even up until the 1980s, there has been changes within Vatican law, so that's going to play a part in their international relations. What is the point of this information? I created this video to find out why a religion or a sect of religion, like Catholicism is a sect of Christianity, felt the need to have their own city. What was the backing of this? Why did this even happen? And in order to do this, I'm using secondary sources as well as looking at the Lateran Treaty itself as a primary piece of evidence. Because in order to understand this whole thing, you have to understand the treaty itself. So, what is our thesis for this project? The Vatican was created because of political expansion, Catholic expansion, and the reality that the Vatican was already a sovereign state. So that's really what we're going to look at. First, we're going to look at the political expansion. Second, the Catholic expansion. And what really a sovereign state means. So let's go ahead and get started. Political expansion. Why was the Vatican city-state created? Using these sources, as you see, we're going to be diving into what this political expansion means, specifically looking at Italy. So, Mussolini decided to create this treaty between him and the Pope in order to help separate Italy from Catholicism and from the Catholic Church, but also to increase their international relations, which is kind of interesting. So, in a 1920 letter that Mussolini wrote to Gabriel di Annunzio, I believe Catholicism can be used as one of the greatest forces for the expansion of Italy in the world. So, you would think, oh, well, you're creating a treaty to separate these two entities. But in doing so, Benito Mussolini had the idea that by separating, we will come closer together, because now these are two separate entities that can work as one, rather than one entity trying to go above the other one. So the Italian People's Party, the PPI, inside of the Vatican prior to the Lateran Treaty, had this idea that they needed to push fascism, because that's what Italy was pushing. And then all of a sudden in 1922, it is quoted as saying no connection between the Italian People's Party, the PPI, and the Vatican Church. So the Vatican in the early 1920s decided to create this separation between Italy and the Vatican. So jumping to 1929, and even the few years prior to 1929, we see all the negotiations happening between the Vatican and Mussolini in Italy. So, with these negotiations, Mussolini was basically giving the Vatican pretty much anything the Pope wanted because he really wanted this treaty to be pushed through. So, one of the things that Mussolini offered was 750 million in cash and 1 billion worth of government stock. Plus, Italy would have to pay the Vatican through taxes and things of that nature. And this continued up until the 1980s when the Vatican stopped requiring Italian people to give them money. So, money was a huge driving force from both the Vatican side, the Holy See side, as well as the side of Italy. So, during this time period, there was obviously a lot of changes, a lot of political messes that were going on. Basically, this entire time period between probably the early 1900s and the 1935, there was this huge political mess that was going on between the Vatican City having different changes of power and different bishops and all this other stuff, as well as Italy changing governmental figures. So, because of all this, Mussolini had to be very careful with how he handled the treaty. And a lot of fascist press started pushing that Catholic Boy Scouts were quote unquote anti Italian. So, picture this, you have all of Rome, all of Italy, but then you have the Vatican in a very small portion of Rome. So, people basically had to decide, am I Catholic or am I Italian? Or am I some type of intermix that's the same and I have to be affected by both sides? So this was a big issue during this time of trying to figure out what everybody was. Mussolini also started to exploit the Catholic Church. Originally, he assumed that this idea would be something that both sides would be able to come together, and Mussolini would be like, well, you're technically a sovereign nation, but because I want it done, it'll still get done. And that just wasn't the case. And so there was a lot of times where the Catholic Church got exploited by Benito Mussolini until they basically were like, you know what, this is my ideals, things that I want done. You no longer have control over this type of idea. Italy basically had a lot of assumptions that the Vatican and Italy would have these great connections, but that wasn't always the case. And when we start talking about Catholic expansion, you're going to be able to see why. So, with that shift, let's move over to Catholic expansion. So, within Catholic expansion, we see this idea that obviously, if you have your own nation, the thought process is that you will be able to continue all of these ideas and all these things you want to do, being able to convert people into Catholicism easier than if you're without your own nation. There is a quote from The Vatican and Italian Fascism by John Pollard. Italy has been given back to God, and God back to Italy. So, with this separation from the Lateran Treaty, there was this idea that we are ourselves. Now we can shine God to everyone. So, not only was the Catholic Church trying to expand through, obviously, Catholicism, but the Holy See was also expanding in money. So, being able to be a sovereign entity allowed them more connections with corporations, allowed them tax exemptions because they were a church. So, with all of these different types of money things going on, they were able to increase their funds dramatically. And because of that, they became an extremely rich state. And during World War II, they had a lot of connections with Germany and a lot of connections with, not necessarily outright giving Germany money, but there was always this fear from other countries that that's what was going on. And so, with this increased money, became increased popularity on the national stage, and it really put the Vatican and put the Holy See on this forefront of international relations. So, the Vatican also condemned the United States for not fighting global poverty. If we look at the sheer size of two states, regardless of religious impact or how they were created, if you have the assumption that the Vatican City is its own state, is its own nation, then what small state like the Vatican would be outright to condemn the United States for not fighting global poverty? So this was kind of a big pushback to their idea of international relations. They also refused to join the League of Nations because they felt that there was atheism going on and that this wasn't what God wanted them to do. So obviously, while the Vatican and the Holy See is a religious entity and what they want to push is Catholicism, there's also this idea that that's not them being a nation is not the forefront of what they want. The forefront of what they want is Catholicism and is Christianity. Also, looking at Catholic expansion, they were very active in the Balkans and they tried to make connections with Yugoslavia, even to the point of discriminating against Italy for their actions in Yugoslavia. And this kind of helped increase that split between Italy and the Vatican City, in order to get that point across that they were not the same entity anymore. And so not only did the Vatican City have interests in the Balkans and Yugoslavia, but as we're going to see in the sovereign state section, they also had connections with other countries as well. So let's do a little review real quick. The reason I decided to separate Italy's expansion versus Catholic expansion is they really are a separate thing, as well as the reason that the sovereign state idea and Catholic expansion are separate, because it really dives you into what is the difference between the Catholic Church as a whole and what is the difference between the Holy See. So, with that idea in mind, let us move to the third reason why the Vatican was created. Because it was already an existing sovereign state. So why not make it official? According to Peter's City by Thomas More, Peter's City was written in 1930, just after the Lateran Treaty was created. In fact, Thomas More was writing the book when all of this was going on. So, Peter's City, it says that everyone already agreed within the Vatican City that it was sovereign by God, therefore, it was sovereign by man. So basically, what Thomas More is arguing is that we shouldn't be having these arguments about, is the Catholic Church or is the Vatican or is the Holy See a sovereign nation, because it's already sovereign by God. So this is kind of a symbolism to baptism. It's this idea that when you're baptized, that is a symbolization to other people that you have accepted God. Well, the treaty was kind of like that according to the Holy See. In their eyes, they were already a sovereign nation, but this treaty just allowed the rest of the world and Italy to know that they were also a sovereign nation. In 1920, prior to the treaty, the Vatican was open about about Italy's treatment of Yugoslavia. So Italy didn't do very well in Yugoslavia, and the Vatican did everything it could to outright tell Italy that. And so, even though the Vatican was in Rome during this time and was not its own nation, it still had the quote unquote right to say these things about Italy. They were already acting as a separate entity. So why not make it official? And this is kind of this argument of, what are we doing? If the Vatican was already opening up about Yugoslavia, then why don't we make ourselves separate to each other? The Pope also had correspondence and diplomacy within 6 different countries. These 6 different countries, the Vatican also openly recognized the 6 of these countries before Italy did: Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, and Finland. All 6 of these states were recognized by the Pope and by the Holy See as being 6 sovereign nations. The Vatican also created alliances with many of those 6 states as a way to show camaraderie, and that we are all created around the same time. We all deserve the popularity that all of these other nations are getting. If we flash forward a little bit to World War II during the Holocaust, this is some time when we see the church and the Holy See really stepping out and saying, look, these are our viewpoints as a nation. During the Holocaust, they outright said that killing people was wrong, because according to Christianity, killing someone is not the right thing to do. But they never once said that the Holocaust was wrong, and they never once condemned Germany or Poland or any other country for what they were doing against human rights. And the United States, Great Britain, and many other countries stepped out and said that the policy of silence was not appropriate, and that this was not something that the Holy See should be outright putting. It held an idea of neutrality. And for a country just coming into its own, whether you're religious backing or not, this can be hard for other countries to take in. So this idea of neutrality may or may not have been the best move for the Vatican. So let's do a little preview. With political expansion, we see this idea that Italy was able to get a lot more out of this, but it kind of started to bite them in the butt when the Vatican went against many of their wishes. And so Mussolini had to make a choice. And he chose to go through with the treaty, thinking that it would help him, when in reality it started to bite him in the butt, and the Catholic Church went out against many things that Italy was doing. The second reason was Catholic expansion. We see that Catholicism was able to get into many different countries and was able to connect and make these connections with these sovereign states as an idea and as a religion. We also see that the Vatican was already a sovereign state. It was sovereign by God, according to the Catholics, and it was already making outright disagreements with Italy and neighboring countries before it was even its own state. So this is a small overview of why the Vatican city-state was created. Well, now let's look at what the Vatican looks like today, and the Vatican as a Vatican city-state and as the Holy See. When in Rome, a book written by Robert Hutchinson, is basically a story of his time in Rome and what he saw at the Vatican. It is set up like a corporation. It has clerical workers and phone operators and people to make sure the lights stay on, janitorial staff, but it's not set up like a business where people can just come in and out. It's very secluded. In fact, there are a few places on the grounds that people are not even allowed to be in, and then others that you are only allowed to be in for specific purposes. So when we think of the Vatican City State, we think of just the chapel, but it's not like that. It's a huge area. Hutchinson even goes to write on that only about 8,000 people have access to the low-cost stores, pharmacies, and gas stations that are on the premise in Rome, in the Vatican City State. So it is set up like a city. It is set up like a nation. But, as we're going to see in Stephen Young's Separating State from Church, we're looking at the laws. And that's kind of the point of this project, was to look at what those laws are that created and withstood the Vatican City State. So, not only has the VCS law incorporated Italian law and adopted the same legal structure, it also permits Italian courts to prosecute certain criminal acts committed in the city-state. So even when you're looking at laws, the Vatican City State is not its own entity when it allows Italian courts to prosecute certain criminal acts. So there's not even a true separation of judicial systems within Rome versus the Vatican City State. Recently, they had a conflict over Banco Ambrosio collapse in 1982. In this instance, Vatican authorities challenged the jurisdiction of Italian authorities who wished to arrest the head of the Vatican Bank. So there are these overlaps, and sometimes they're allowed by both sides, but then other times when it depicts the head of the Vatican Bank, then Italians are no longer able to be there. So there's this very big gray area on what is someone that lives in the Vatican City State versus what is someone that lives in Rome. The Holy See, and this goes into this definition of what is the Holy See versus what is the Vatican, is one of the oldest diplomatic representatives in the world. And it has diplomatic relations with 175 people. 175 countries. And this idea that this tiny city-state, like what we saw in with Athens and Sparta, the small state is able to have connections with 175 different countries, which is really interesting and really vast. So now that we've looked at the three main reasons that the Vatican City State was created, looking at political expansion, Catholic expansion, and how it was already a sovereign state, we've also been able to see what the Vatican really is. So I want to ask all of you the underlying question: was the Vatican its own sovereign state? And it's a fair question. We have to wonder if it's a real city or if it's just some religious theology. And what I would like to say, out of all of this research I've done and everything I've looked at, the Vatican City is a city-state. It has international relations. It has people that live there. It has gas stations and pharmacies and everything else that normal cities have. The only difference is it's run by the Pope, and it has way more connections to Italy than other countries have to different countries. That is the main difference. So I want to leave with one final quote. But first, I really want you all to think, is this something that you agree with? And you may comment in the comments below. But look at the screen. This quote's really important, and this is what I will leave you with. I want to thank everyone that helped make this project possible. Dr. Byers, thank you for listening. Thank you for allowing us to do something a little more creative this time. And anyone that watches, if you do, please comment any research you all have on the Vatican. I think it's a very interesting subject, and I've really enjoyed this project. Thanks, guys.